I think it's easy for sustainability in EV startups to think that that's enough, just to say, oh, it's good for the environment. But you have to kind of think through who's your customer and how can I make money off of this? How can this be a profitable business? They may not necessarily like the idea, but when you hit somebody in their wallet, then you start speaking their language to look at how much this is going to save you. In some instances, it can actually see really get up to $55,000 throughout its lifetime. And when you tell somebody who has 30 of these things, that's a lot of money. Once you have the idea, go talk to your customers. You might think it's a problem, but for the majority of your customers, it's not that big a deal. Once you have that idea, again, just stick with it. There's a lot of companies out there that have been going at it for 10, 12 years and now are just getting their traction.
Hey, Jack, thank you very much for joining us today on the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and eSkiPro?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Jack Duffy Protentis, and I'm the founder and CEO of eSki. And what eSki is doing is trying to decarbonize and quiet up recreational vehicles, starting with personal watercraft or jet skis. So, really the name of the game is these vehicles there's no emissions regulations on them. There's no catalytic converter, there's no muffler. And they actually pump their emissions directly into the water. So that, for me, never really felt right to me. These are vehicles that have always been kind of special to me because I'm actually legally blind. And I was born a car guy that can't drive a car. I got into recreational vehicles because I found it with some help with friends and family that I could do these, but I just kind of realized just working on them, they emit like crazy, and it didn't sit right with me that my fun was coming at the cost of the next generation's ability to have fun. So I decided to do something about it, and so I started eSki Watercraft.
What led you to decide that building this business was a good idea as opposed to like joining a company that already made skis and tried to make them electrified?
Yeah. It was kind of twofold. So one, I've always been somebody, I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. In schooling, I love building things. So this is sort of an extension of that. I think, building a business is akin to building any sort of project. As an engineer, I was looking at the EV market overall, maybe road going vehicles, or some of the companies that had gotten early traction were actually electric dirt bikes. And I'd seen some OEMs that were kind of classic, namely KTM, that was making an electric dirt bike, and people didn't care for it. And I think it's because in their head, there's this direct comparison. You have a company that has been making gas jet skis or gas vehicles, and then you make an electric one. So inherently, they're going to immediately compare and contrast. And I think people kind of come at it from more of a negative light to say, well, how can this be better than what you've already been making? But if you start something from scratch, like kind of the one that really jumps out at me is Zero and namely Stark, which make electric dirt bikes, there's nothing to compare and contrast to. So if you do it right, people are much more receptive to it. So kind of looking at the trends of that, and you can kind of see that similarly in road going vehicles. You see in major manufacturers make gas or electric cars that have been making gas for a while, and they're not super well received. They look at the EV charger. People love the charger. They made an electric one that's I think it's 700 horsepower, but people just don't like it because again they're doing that direct comparison versus you look at somebody like Tesla, and they're coming out, and then people, because again there's not that contrast in comparison.
Yeah.
I think people just kind of inherently like something that's fresh and new, I guess. So that's sort of why I decided to run it myself.
It's interesting to me. Like, it reminds me a bit of, I was having a conversation the other day with an alt protein manufacturer. And it was almost the kind of thing where it reminds me a little bit of that, where calling something an alt protein or saying it's like a meat or fish alternative makes you think negatively, like it's the alternative of that rather than like an entirely new category. So you almost feel the loss of not having it, even though it's something new. And it makes me think of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So You obviously saw something here in the industry that most people have missed.
Mhm.
Why do you think that's flown under the radar for so long?
I think what happens is there's the kind of the really big items that people, kind of traditionally would see: road going vehicles, big rigs, freighters. Those are things that I think are very commonly in, kind of the forefront of anybody in their daily lives. Again, road going vehicles, you're in one. Shipping, I think everybody understands shipping. But when it comes to sort of the smaller, I'll go with niche vehicles in products that somebody maybe doesn't necessarily interact with on a day to day, those are where I think that's why a lot of people kind of overlook them. May it be jet skis, because people don't. There are a lot of people that just don't even think about them, or ATVs or boats, because they're in a landlocked state. So the boats just don't come into their head. Things like that, or even something as simple as I've seen some great ideas from construction is another one where there's a lot of great innovation happening there in terms of something as simple as a nail gun for flooring that you can stand up and use. But again, that's something that somebody like you or I, we're not interacting with on a day to day basis. So that's something that's not in the forefront of our minds. So therefore, it's an overlooked subcategory. I think that's sort of why you have things like this happening, where it seems so simple. The amount of times when I'm talking to somebody who doesn't know recreational vehicles at all, and I said, well, I'm building an electric jet ski, and they'll say something akin to, "Okay, so what makes yours special?" I'm like, well, it's electric. They're like, "Well, no, they're all electric." No, none of them are. The reaction is like, "Wait, what? I thought they all were. That seems so obvious." But again, for them, that's something that they don't interact with. So there's just this kind of underlying assumption, and no real thought put towards it, for valid reason.
It's
Yeah.
funny. I wouldn't have thought couldn't have thought that, because my thought would be electricity and water don't mix. So you wouldn't make a obviously it's working for you, but for me that wouldn't have been my first thought.
I mean, that's a common one I get. The thing that I always say is, because that's especially at boat shows, I get that so much. And
Oh,
my
I bet
my
you do.
go-to line is, if you look at, especially like modern boats, they have full electric Garmin systems with sound systems, a battery. Yachts have full batteries on boards with generators. You just waterproof it and engineer it right, and there's already electricity on water.
At what point did you realize that rental companies were the real opportunity as opposed to marketing to individual buyers?
Yeah. So I think it kind of came from two different realizations. So one was when I was going to investors and I was saying, I'm going to make an electric jet ski. They say, okay. and what's going to set you apart? And it's like, well, we're electric, and nobody else is electric, and it's clean. And then go, yeah, but how are you going to really penetrate the market initially? So those sort of questions really forced me to look around, and then I ended up, I purchased a marketing analyses, mostly just for kind of research purposes, to see where the biggest submarkets were, what places are growing rapidly, what places are dwindling. In that analyses, I saw that rental companies were almost 50% of the market. So, okay, well, that's interesting. So I started going to rental companies, because they're the biggest subsector, and asking, do you like your product? Do you like what exists? And it was pretty much a resounding no. For whatever reason, and I still can't quite figure this out, even though rental companies are the largest subsector, the consumers are what dictate the market. So my example is the Fish Pro from Sea-Doo. People like to fish on their jet skis, so they actually have three different models now for having outrigging, so you can have multiple poles in a live well and all this sort of stuff. But yet there still is no jet ski that's just more tailored for the rental companies. So once I started doing, kind of, the customer discovery, and looking at what is the biggest sector, I realized that there isn't anything for them. So that's kind of really where that spawned from was, and then I started getting a lot more positive feedback from investors, because now it's not just I'm building an electric jet ski. It's this: I'm building an electric jet ski for my beachhead market, which is rental companies that are traditionally overlooked and don't have a good option for them. So we're building that option.
Okay, real quick. If you're a sustainability founder and growth feels stuck, this part is for you. You're doing between 700K to 3 million in revenue. You've built something amazing, but growing it is just exhausting. Every lead comes from a referral. Every deal depends on you. And every time you try to scale, something breaks. Your pipeline, your sanity, or even worse, your impact. The problem is you are too close to see the real issues. You're trying to read the label from inside the bottle. That is exactly what we help you with at Plucky Bamboo. We work with Planet First B2B companies to find and fix the hidden bottlenecks that quietly block their growth, whether that's unclear positioning, weak lead flow, or a sales process that just doesn't convert. First, we uncover what's broken. Then, if it makes sense, we build the systems to fix it, so you can scale your impact without burning out. We've done this for companies like Blue Banyan and Scrap, and after hundreds of conversations with sustainability founders and CEOs, I know where the cracks show up when you start to grow. So if you're ready to find and fix what's holding back your growth and impact, visit pluckybamboo.com to see how we can help. Okay, back to the episode. I love that. I think that's a really important lesson for anyone watching or listening to bear in mind is that thing of two lessons there actually. One, doing really deep customer research and figuring out the market before you put everything into it, because you may have to pivot after you create the product to that point, in which case you then have to change the product and it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
So get that product market fit right before you build the product. The other side of it is that beachhead market. There are so many companies that feel like they don't want to narrow their target audience because they feel like, oh, we can market to everyone. Why not? Actually, the deeper you go and the more of a beachhead you get, you can speak their language better and you can create better solutions for them. And investors love it, as you found out.
Yeah, I remember I was in some accelerator and I wish I could give the mentor the proper kudos. I forget her name, unfortunately, but in this class or in accelerator program I was in, her phrase was "there's riches in niches," which is so true. If you try and tackle everything, you can't be that thing for everybody. But if you find that niche and be that thing for that niche, then that's your starting place, and you can try and grow into then having different products or trying to match what everybody wants eventually, but it allows you to get your foot in the door and build that solution for your initial target customer.
So, I mean, the business has obviously been going well. You're getting lots of letters of intent coming through. What exactly did you say or show to trigger that kind of response?
Yeah. So a lot of these rental companies aren't necessarily, we'll say, into the whole EV idea. Some of these guys have been running their rental companies for 40 plus years, and they've been going with one company for the last 25 years. They know them, they fix them, and that's just it for them.
Traditional, let's say.
Yeah. And again, I've certainly had some choice words overall when I talk about it being electric, but really from there, I think the best thing is to ask them why. A kind of anecdote that comes to mind is that I was at a boat show and a gentleman came by, and kind of our initial tagline to get people interested is electric jet skis. What do you think? And he said, "Can I be honest?" "Please." He said, I often hate them." "Okay, so why?" So we started talking, and after 10 minutes of explaining, even if you're not necessarily into climate change, we'll say, or into EVs and you like your gas vehicle, here are all the things that are benefits. There's reduced maintenance, no noise. Here's all the money it can save you. Once I did that, this gentleman was actually, when people would walk by, was flagging people saying, come here, you have to come check this out. So that was similar to what I would do with the rental companies. Is they may not necessarily like the idea, but when you hit somebody in their wallet, then you start speaking their language. So I had a chart, and literally just a trifold pamphlet about all the features, and I had a chart that was a comparison of, a comparable priced Sea-Doo, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and ours. And I said, look at how much this is going to save you. And, in some instances, it can actually see really up to $55,000 throughout its lifetime. And when you tell somebody who's has 30 of these things, that's a lot of money. So, yeah, if you hit them in their wallet, they'll start turning.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest or the fastest growing sustainability companies are starting to realize that. Like, as much as we would love to live in a world where people do good for the sake of it, it's very much about like the commercial outcomes. If
Yeah,
you could save someone money or lower their risk or something like that, then they're so much more likely to buy. I
absolutely.
think people are starting to come around to that,
Mhm.
but there are still lots of people that aren't, and yeah, not growing as quickly. So then you've been speaking to the rental companies, but you've had to pitch to both those people and investors to get funding at the same time.
Mhm.
Now, they obviously care about very different things.
Yeah.
So, how have you, I guess, adjusted your messaging to speak to each group effectively? And like, there's one thing meeting up with them in person, speaking to them, that kind of thing. But say your website, your social media, how have you managed to speak to both at the same time?
I would say the methodology is try and do two prong and try and break, especially on the website, try and break things up. I've seen people actually even in the past utilize two different websites, one that's more customer focused and one that's an investor. So you have two different business cards, and if you're someone's a customer and the customer style business card, if they're a potential investor, you hand the investor, and then it leads them into two different directions. What I do is I have different tabs on the website to cater to each person. So we have a tab that's focused on the cost savings and all the features. So that's going to be something that a consumer is more interested in. But then I have things about all of the traction that we've gained, all of the LOIs in a news style sub tab, and then that's going to be something that an investor is more interested in. Having geofencing is neat for an investor, but they don't particularly care. But that's really big for a rental company. So it's just about adjusting kind of on the fly. I have multiple different pitch decks for different people and different investors. Decks for people who are a little more climate focused. So it focuses more on the carbon emissions reduction. I have decks for someone that just doesn't particularly care about the green. They just want to see what the business is. So it focuses a little more on the business model and why rental companies want this and need this. In the money that it can save them. So therefore the money we can make off of that. So it's all about sort of adjusting on the fly for who you're talking to.
It catches a lot of people out how to make the front facing part of the business speak to both at the same time.
Yeah.
And you're right, it does fall into two camps. It's the people that have two different websites, and it's the people like yourself where they have the use cases on the site. And I think personally, the way you do it feels better because operationally, it's less to look after. I mean, one site is hard enough to look after, let alone two, when you're building a business. And there's also that thing of speaking with different messaging depending on the investors. That almost feels like a common sense thing that not enough people do
Mm.
because every investor is going to care about different things. But it is difficult building a pitch deck, not just because of the work you have to do behind it, but also the emotional work. Like you're going to these people for investment and making a different deck for each one, it can be quite draining.
Mhm.
Curious, as you've sort of built the business to where it is now, what's been the biggest challenge that you feel you've faced?
I think I would honestly have to go with being able to stick through the downs. Starting a company is one of the most exciting things ever. Is also one of the hardest things ever. And there are times where we've almost run out of money, and it's so easy in that instance to just kind of be like, all right, hey, I can't handle the stress anymore. Or you can take that instance and really try and grind through. And because of that, I've saved from like the brink and gotten grants and things like that have picked us up. But it's just having the tenacity to stick through. Um, there'll be people that will say, even close to you in your life, they'll say, "What are you doing?" how are you realistically gonna, move forward with this? You should be getting a job that's paying you well and in pushing that career forward. And in those times, it's really easy to say, yeah, I mean that's fair, and potentially kind of go down that path. But if you really believe in what you're doing, and I truly believe that this is a great idea, and that this is something that can work, that will happen. No, I always say I'd bet my right leg on it. And if you have kind of that mentality, then it's a little bit easier to fight off those thoughts. But just the challenge of sticking through it in the tough times. There's days where I was trying to get something done for a boat show, and I was working 26 hours straight. I'd literally go for 26 hours, go home, sleep for 3, and then come back and work another 18 or 24 or whatever it might have been. That puts you through a lot. But then when things that are great happen, the first time I saw the completed CAD of the jet ski, it was such an amazing feeling. And the first time I got the battery box and I held it in my hands, it's you have to focus on those and let those instances drive you forward.
Yeah, it is a tough game, and yeah, I think you've got to be crazy to keep going with it. I think we all are, to be completely honest with you. You're right that you've got to have the good times almost kind of counterbalance the bad, but I think one thing that doesn't get talked about often enough, I think, is the survivorship bias. Like, tons of people say, on the one hand, you've got the normal people who have a job, that as soon as you get big enough for them to notice you, they say, aren't you lucky, successful overnight? It's like, no, we've been doing this for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years. And then the other side of it is we tend to think that everyone that starts a business is successful with it
Mhm,
because of that survivorship bias. And we
mhm.
tend to think like, okay, they had a morning routines. That must be how you become a millionaire and all that kind of thing. And it's actually, no, you get through it by just getting through all of that horrible times,
Yeah.
getting through all of that crap, just pushing through it. And I think you've got to have some real grit to make a business successful. So then outside of that, growing the business, getting that sort of letters of intent, speaking to investors, getting the funding side of things. Let's talk about the product side of things. So manufacturing is something on its own scale. It's a beast, especially going from like something completely new to
Yeah.
production. Do you have a plan in place yet? How are you planning to grow without losing that control or that quality?
Yeah, yeah. So, I think it's multifaceted. So for starters, I think, not to be a little biased, but I think I have a bit of an advantage in being an engineer because my pursuit of a high quality product trumps a lot. I don't want to cut corners. Obviously, there's still the business side of things. I'm still trying to make it affordable and achievable for anybody, but really trying to stick to that quality. So to that end, that comes with not just a lot of prototyping and testing of once we start our manufacturing. Before I actually even start it, one of my initial hires is a quality assurance engineer to start putting processes in place to assure quality maintains. And even I've started trying to do as much as I can in that. um, I have multiple suppliers for pretty much everything. Yeah, other than just some small niche parts that are a little hard to get multiple suppliers for. But um, you know that I've vetted and made sure that their product is quality, so that even if for some freak chance one of my initial top supplier something goes wrong there, that I can then immediately jump to the next person that I already kind of have queued up. In that I also have confidence in. And then just to scale, it's just a matter of scaling it. We actually our methodologies, again, just engineering. We just did a logarithmic growth and plotted scaling up unit production, and that's what we did because that makes sense. You start like I think our first quarter is 12, then the next quarter is 41, and then the next quarter is 96 in it, or whatever the exact numbers are. But it scales at a logarithmic rate, which feels pretty doable. And being able to have steps in place for each production milestone. The initial ones will be sort of a more booth style where there's 3 or 4 bays and everybody's working on just one jet ski. And then we add a couple more bays and we scale the size of the facility. And now it becomes, well, this side's doing the top and this side's doing the deck and this side's doing the hull. And then we merge them together. And then, you bring those 2 lines and you put them in line. And now all of a sudden you have an assembly line. So it's a matter of just trying to think ahead as much as possible. The facility that we're planning on manufacturing in has the ability to scale up with us in size, so we don't have to move. Trying to think all those things through, so that manufacturing can be as clean as possible.
What's a belief about sustainability or EV startups that you think most founders get wrong?
Yeah. I think a classic one, especially for EV, but even sustainability, I think the kind of green wave, I'm not going to say has died down in terms of investment, but the viewpoint has changed. Again, kind of harkening back to, what I was talking about with investors. This is a jet ski. It doesn't produce carbon emissions. It's quiet. And they go, yeah, okay. We know that about EVs. It's no longer this new thing that's like, oh wow, it's less maintenance. It doesn't emit like CO2. They get it, and I think that's for a lot of investors not quite enough. You do have your investors that are in it strictly for climate reasons in trying to save the planet, and fantastic. Those are the great ones. But there's a lot of people, there's a lot of investors who are investors because that's what they do, and their goal is to make money. So if you say, well, we capture CO2 from the air, and this machine costs $1 million. Okay, well, what's the business model for that? Where do you make money? And I think it's easy for sustainability in EV startups to think that that's enough, just to say, oh, it's good for the environment. But you have to kind of think through more of, it's good for the environment, but then again, who's your customer, and what, and how can I make money off of this? How can this be a profitable business? Is it you're selling it to countries or governments to help reduce their carbon emissions? Okay, well, now you need to start kind of lining up some potential pilots from different countries or governments or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that's probably the most common one. It's green and that's enough. But I think that was the case, but that's no longer the case.
And then, if you had one piece of advice for another founder in sustainability, what would it be?
What I would suggest is, I think it's this kind of theme that's running throughout, is twofold. One is really find your target customer. Customer validation, customer discovery, it should be almost your first step, if not your first. Once you have the idea, go talk to your customers. Go find your customers. Go see what they want, because I think it's really easy for founders to say, "Oh, this is a problem, and I have a solution for it." But then you can go and find out that that's actually not that big of a problem for somebody. You might think it's a problem, but for the majority of your customers, it's not that big a deal. So I think that would be one of my biggest ones. And then also, once you have that idea, again, just stick with it. Even if you might have to put it on the back burner, and you started it and then you have to go get a job for a bit just to save some more money to keep pushing, that's okay. There's a lot of companies, like you said, with survivor biased. There's a lot of companies out there that have been going at it for 10, 12 years and now are just getting their traction. And it's easy to look at those companies and say, oh, I just raised $40 million round. My God, good for you. How long have you been around? 12 years. There's those companies out there that I've known some founders that have started their company and within 3 months raised $5 million. But there's everything in between. So stick with it if you really believe in your product. There's some investor out there that will also believe in you and believe in your product. And as long as it's, again, a problem that you're solving for somebody that somebody wants a solution for, then you have a buyer. And those are the three, those are the main things that you need. Somebody to buy it and somebody to help make you help help you build it.
How can people find out more about eSki, get involved if they want to get in touch?
Yeah. So our website is eSkiPro.com. And you could also reach out to contact@eSkiPro.com. Now we are doing our fundraising round. So if anybody's potentially has somebody who they know that might be interested in investing, or they themselves are interested in investing, I'd love to have a conversation. You can also find us on Instagram at just eSki. And yeah, we go to boat shows a lot. Sometimes you find us there. So we try to be around.
Jack, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation, and yeah, wish you the best.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.